I never thought the worst moment of my life would be projected on a giant screen for the whole damn town to see. But there it was, footage from my own bedroom, playing at the local drive-in I'd been hired to fix. And there she was, Juliana, my wife, tangled up with another man in front of an audience that included my neighbors, my clients. Everyone. I only hit him once. He didn't get back up. That was the moment everything inside me cracked wide open. I never imagined my life would take me to a forgotten town like Maple Glen, Iowa. But here I am. Funny how plans unravel faster than you can make them. Back in Chicago, I was someone 44 years old and deep in the heart of the tech world, working as a software engineer, surrounded by innovation, city lights, and ambition. That skyline used to mean something to me, but I left all of that behind. For love. For her. For Juliana. Now, I run a small repair shop tucked between a barber and a bakery on Main Street. The sign above the door is sun-bleached and peeling. Read Fix It. No frills. No flash. Just steady hands and quiet work. I fix everything from cracked phone screens to old-school radios, though sometimes the tools feel foreign, like they belong to someone else's life. And maybe they do. Mr. Reed, think you can breathe life back into my grandfather's radio? Mrs. Bennett asks, sliding a dusty Philco across the counter. I'll do my best, I reply, gently turning it over, examining the worn circuitry inside. That's how most conversations go these days, short, to the point. I was never the chattiest guy, but since moving here, I've barely spoken more than a few necessary words. And I can't help but wonder, did Juliana notice when my stories started shrinking? When our lively wine-fueled debates turned into strained silence over dinner? The bell above the shop door jingles. Lena walks in holding a cup of coffee. She's Juliana's sister, my shop manager, and, if I'm being honest, maybe the only person in this town who really sees me. Brought you this, she says, setting the cup down beside me. You've been hunched over that motherboard for hours. Lena doesn't demand the spotlight like her sister does. At 30, she's calm, efficient, organized in a way that brings structure to my cluttered little world. She handles the books and keeps the inventory tight, and I'm thankful for it every single day. Juliana always lit up a room, but Lena, she holds it together. Thanks, I mumble, suddenly realizing I skipped lunch again. Through the window, I spot my Mustang parked at the curb, my last tie to the man I used to be. I spent countless weekends restoring that car, every bolt and polish a small rebellion against the slow, quiet death of excitement that Maple Glen brings. Juliana says the car's childish. I say it's the only damn thing that still feels like me. Big weekend, Lena says, snapping me back to the present. Drive-in kicks off their season tomorrow. They need you to check the projection software. I nod. Just another job. Another excuse to avoid going home to a house where love feels like a ghost that packed up and left years ago. That night, I pull into the driveway and feel the bass before I hear it. Music spilling from the windows like the house itself is trying to forget where it is. Every light in the place is on. Another party. Juliana's way of pretending we still live in a city worth impressing. I sit in the car longer than I should, trying to gather the strength to walk into a home filled with strangers who smile like I'm some kind of backwoods curiosity. The once successful city guy who traded it all in and lost the plot. There he is. Juliana's voice slices through the noise as I finally walk through the door. Her dress looks like it belongs at a film premiere, her makeup flawless. My brilliant husband, hiding in his garage again. Laughter bubbles up around her like champagne. Someone tries to ask about my work, but Juliana doesn't let me speak. He's just fiddling with junk as usual, she says with a grin. Nothing like Blake's new development project. Right, Blake? And just like that, there he is. Blake Renshaw, sprawled out on my couch like he owns the place. Real estate mogul, town sweetheart, basically the guy I used to be before life had other plans. Some of us build the future, he says with a smirk. And some of us fix the past. The room erupts in laughter. Across the room, I catch Lena watching me. Her expression is unreadable, maybe a warning, maybe sympathy. I can't tell. Blake was just telling us about Paris, Juliana says. her voice curling around the words like a dare. Remember when you promised to take me there, Lucas? Before we got stuck. Here. She knows exactly where to hit. I make for the kitchen, pretending I need another beer. The windows are open, and the whispers from outside drift in like smoke. She could have done better. What a waste. He's nice, but kind of dull. Lena finds me, her voice low. You don't deserve that. I give a bitter laugh. Maybe I do. Because after years of Juliana's subtle cuts and casual cruelty, I've started to believe the worst things people say about me. But what none of us know, not yet, is that tomorrow night at the drive-in will change everything. That quiet collapse I've been surviving will finally break wide open in front of the entire town. And when it does, I'll finally learn that sometimes it takes losing everything to remember who the hell you really are. She doesn't flinch. There's no panic in her eyes, no shame in her posture. She just sits up slowly, letting the sheets slip off her shoulders as she reaches calmly for a cigarette on the nightstand. We slept together, Lucas, she says, lighting it with practiced ease. Her voice is steady. More than once. I stare at her, trying to piece last night together through the fog in my skull. It's all bits and pieces, her hands guiding mine, the softness in her voice, the kind of intimacy I hadn't felt in years. The kind that made me feel human again. My mouth opens, ready to protest, to deny, but the words won't come. She blows a thin stream of smoke toward the ceiling. I don't regret it, she says, eyes fixed ahead. But if you do, we can pretend it didn't happen. The morning light outlines her features as she gazes out the window. No makeup. No silk robes or matching lingerie. Just a plain cotton t-shirt and bare legs tucked beneath her, so different from the curated image Juliana always insisted on. And for the first time, I start to see what I've been missing all these years. Simplicity. Honesty. The kind of presence that doesn't need polishing to shine. I should go, I mumble, but I don't move. My body stays rooted to her bed like it's the only safe place I've known in months. Lena slides out from under the covers and heads to the bathroom. You need coffee, she calls back, and a toothbrush. She returns a minute later with both. And you should really look in the mirror, she adds, handing them over. Really look. In the bathroom, I face myself. My reflection stares back, bloodshot eyes, unshaven jaw, a man slouching under the weight of years he never signed up for. It isn't the hangover that unsettles me. It's the realization that I've let Juliana shape me into someone I barely recognize. Back in the kitchen, she hands me a mug of black coffee. No cream, no sugar, just strong and unfiltered. Like her. I think the moment I realized I loved you, she says softly, was when you ruined your favorite shirt to pull the cat out from under Mrs. Whitmore's mower. I let out a dry laugh. That was just me being an idiot. No, she says, stepping closer, her eyes searching mine. That was you being you. You've just forgotten who that guy is. Her words hit me harder than I expect. Somewhere along the way, I really did lose track of myself. When did I start measuring my worth by Juliana's cold smiles and backhanded compliments? I look at Lena, unsure, gesturing between us. What is this? She shrugs gently. Does it need a name? Maybe we're just two people trying not to fall apart. Maybe that's okay for now. And somehow that feels more real than anything I've known in years. No performances. No masks. Just truth, raw and unpolished. She moves around the apartment getting ready for work, graceful in her movements, asking for nothing, demanding even less. Before she leaves, she brushes a kiss against my cheek, gentle, not possessive, and disappears through the door. I watch her go, catching the curve of her spine as morning sunlight kisses her hair. And I think, if last night really was a mistake, then why does it feel like the first right thing I've done in decades? I never went back to Juliana's house. Not after that. Just the idea of walking through those sterile, picture-perfect rooms designed more for show than for living makes my stomach twist. So when Lena offered her place, I gave a half-hearted shrug. It's closer to the garage, I said, like convenience was the only reason. But deep down, I knew better. Her cottage sits on the edge of town, quiet and full of imperfections. Where Juliana's house screamed luxury, Lena's place whispers comfort. There are books stacked haphazardly, blankets that don't match, floors that creak when you walk. The air smells like coffee and old wood, and the windows actually open. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I wasn't prepared for what came next. At 5:45 the next morning, Lena yanked the blanket off me. Get up, she said. We're running. I groaned into the pillow. I don't run. You do now. 2 miles every day. She stood there, hands on her hips in a faded t-shirt and running shorts, looking like she'd drag me out the door if she had to. And somehow she did. I stumbled behind her into the early dawn air, every step a protest. But we did it. Then we did it again. And again. That became a rhythm, punishing jogs followed by breakfasts I didn't recognize. Smoothies packed with things I couldn't pronounce. Toast that was whole grain, coffee that was black. No sugar. No beer. No excuses. By day 4, I grumbled, I'm not some rehab case. She didn't look up. Good. Because you're not. You're the one doing the work. I'm just the drill sergeant. By the end of the week, I noticed the difference. I slept deeper. The mental fog that had hovered over me for years, something I thought was just part of aging, started to lift. I felt lighter. Then came the Mustang moment. One evening, Lena tossed me the keys. That car's been sitting in dust too long, she said. If you can't see who you are yet, at least recognize the one thing that always did. That '67 Mustang was more than a car, it was my anchor to the life I used to believe in. I spent years restoring it, one bolt at a time. And no matter how many times Juliana complained it was an embarrassment parked in our driveway, I held on to it. I just didn't know that it might be holding onto me too. That Mustang had been my pride once, but now it sat untouched, collecting dust like some forgotten part of me. Just looking at it felt like staring at a mirror, something once alive, now left behind. Lena and I pushed it into her garage one evening, both of us a little out of breath and grinning like kids. That's how it started, just the two of us, stripping it down piece by piece, sanding away years of rust and neglect. We rebuilt the engine together, her handing me tools before I even asked for them, always knowing exactly what I needed. And somehow, with each bolt I tightened and every wire I reconnected, something inside me clicked back into place. My hands remembered things my mind had long forgotten, what it felt like to solve a problem with skill instead of words. To build something real. To finish something that mattered. Lena would toss me a wrench and say, that carburetor's not gonna fix itself, and even though she was joking, her voice always carried this quiet belief in me I hadn't felt in years. Our days settled into a rhythm that felt natural. Uncomplicated. We never labeled anything between us. There were no rules, no need to define what we were. And yet somehow the unspoken lines were perfectly clear. When she counted my squats by kissing my cheek after each one, I didn't flinch. When she sat behind me with a razor in hand and offered to trim the beard that had grown wild, I closed my eyes and let her take care of me. Hold still, she whispered, warm breath brushing my ear as the blade traced a careful path along my jaw. Her touch was steady, without hesitation or judgment. No one had cared for me like this before. Not without strings attached. Not without expecting something in return. Juliana, on the other hand, always made my needs feel like burdens. My desires? Inconveniences she tolerated. But Lena? She just showed up. Over and over again. And people started to notice. At first, it was small things. My clothes were cleaner, better fitting. I walked straighter. I looked people in the eye again. At Duke's Diner, folks who used to only acknowledge Juliana now gave me a nod. A few even stopped by my booth. Good to see you still being you, Lucas, Mike Delaney said with a smile as he passed my table. I didn't know what he meant exactly, but somehow his words reached a part of me I'd nearly forgotten existed. One night, hands greasy with oil and chrome shining under the garage lights, I found myself opening up. My guard slipped and the words came out. She used to call me her country mechanic playing gentleman, I told Lena, wiping sweat from my brow. Said I embarrassed her at parties? Eventually, I started believing her. Lena didn't rush to comfort me. She didn't rush to defend me either. She simply turned toward me, eyes locked on mine. No one gets to decide who you are unless you let them. Simple. Direct. But those words hit harder than any argument or apology ever had. How long had I let Juliana rewrite me? How long had I accepted her version of me as the truth? Later, as we scrubbed the frame of the Mustang together, she shared something unexpected. I almost drowned once, she said, voice steady. Behind the old church. Willow Creek. I was 6. Fell off the footbridge during a storm. Something in my chest tightened. I could almost see it, rushing water, the flash of a small hand, the sound of a scream slicing through the storm. Wait, I said slowly, heart pounding. Was I there? Lena gave a small, knowing smile. Maybe, but you don't have to remember. Her answer stayed with me, lingering in the humid air like something unfinished. Why did she know so much about my life, even the parts one couldn't remember? That night I dreamed of water. Of a little girl in danger. Of a hand reaching out and mine pulling her from the flood. For the first time since that awful night at the drive-in, I didn't dream about Juliana at all. The next afternoon, Lena tossed me the Mustang's keys. Come on, she said. I want to show you something. The car roared to life beneath us, the engine purring like it had been waiting for this ride as long as I had. The road curved around the outskirts of town, the wind rushing through the open windows, sun glinting off chrome. Eventually, we pulled into the lot of the old Methodist church, its white steeple poking up through the trees like a memory rising to the surface. Lena led the way, guiding me behind the building, through grass that brushed against our legs until we reached a wide creek bathed in dappled sunlight. "This is where we used to play," she said quietly. "Me and Juliana." As I stepped closer to the water's edge, a strange feeling swept over me, part recognition, part déjà vu. The sound of the current, the way the sunlight danced on the ripples, it all felt eerily familiar. "Come here," she said, leading me toward a flat rock that jutted from the bank. I followed, drawn to something carved crudely into its surface. Lena, 1996. My fingers brushed over the letters, and then, like someone turned on a projector in my brain, it all came rushing back. Screams. Water. That panicked splash of limbs. And me diving into the creek without thinking twice. "You fell," I whispered. "I pulled you out." Lena nodded slowly, her eyes locked on mine. "You did. You were 6, I murmured, the rest of the memory unspooling fast. "Juliana brought me here for the Labor Day weekend. I was wearing my best shirt. I remember the heat, the party, and the panic," Lena added. "I remember Juliana standing on the shore, yelling about your clothes while you were dragging me to safety." It all landed like a punch to the chest, me, soaked and breathless, holding Lena in my arms while Juliana's only concern was appearances. "I carved this," Lena said, gently touching the stone. "Not just because you saved me, but because that was the day I decided what kind of man I wanted to love someday." She looked at me then, her expression stripped of anything but truth. "For a long time, I thought I was just a silly girl with a crush on her sister's boyfriend. But I know now it wasn't silly. It was real. Because you're the kind of man who doesn't hesitate to jump." My throat clenched, words stuck somewhere between my heart and mouth. I couldn't speak, so I did the only thing I could. I reached for her hand. Lena's fingers curled around mine, and we stood there, side by side, holding on to something that had been buried in the past and was just now starting to bloom. But reality has a way of kicking the door in. That evening, as we returned to her quiet little cottage, my phone came alive like it had been waiting for the perfect moment to ruin everything. Notifications spilled across the screen, 12 texts, 5 missed calls, voicemails filled with trembling sobs and shaky pleas. "It was a mistake, Lucas, please. We've been together 18 years. Doesn't that mean something?" The next day, a bouquet of roses arrived at the shop. The same deep red ones she used to get me every Valentine's Day. My favorite. Along with them came a handwritten note, nostalgic and poetic, painting pictures of our early days in Chicago. The late nights. The laughter. The love we used to know. It was classic Juliana, pulling the emotional strings with military precision. She'd done this dance before, strategic tears, perfectly placed memories, just enough vulnerability to seem sincere. Lena never mentioned the messages or the gifts. She just stuck to her rhythm, early morning runs, eggs and kale smoothies, late nights in the garage. But I noticed things. The flicker of hurt in her eyes when my phone lit up. The way her shoulders tensed when the florist walked through the door. I felt torn in two. On one side, there was Juliana, my wife. 18 years of shared holidays, fights, vacations, compromises, and 1,000 little routines that had once meant something. She was the life I'd built, the partner I'd chosen. And then there was Lena, the girl I once pulled from a river who had now quietly pulled me from drowning in a life that no longer fit. She offered no promises, no big speeches, just a steady presence and this unshakable belief that I was still worth something. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., I slid out of bed and made my way barefoot to the garage. The Mustang stood beneath a sliver of moonlight, every line of it gleaming, restored, revived, reborn. I ran my hand along the smooth curve of its fender, remembering the rust, the neglect, what it used to be. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Another message from Juliana, "Please come home. We can fix this. I miss you." I stared at the screen, then looked back at the car, this thing we'd brought back from the dead with nothing but time, sweat, and stubbornness. And that's when it hit me. The man she wants, he doesn't exist anymore. I whispered it into the stillness, not expecting an answer. But maybe the man I'm becoming, maybe he's just getting started. I turned off my phone and went back to bed. I hadn't made a decision yet, not officially. But something inside me had already shifted. I knew which direction my heart was leaning. The next morning, I was elbow deep in the circuitry of a vintage radio when the bell above the door jingled. Without looking up, I called out, "Be with you in a sec. Take your time, Lucas. I've waited this long." That voice. I froze, the wire still in my fingers. Juliana. When I finally looked up, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the polished, perfection-obsessed woman I'd known. She was still dressed in designer clothes, but they were wrinkled and stained. Her eyes, once sharp and calculating, were ringed with exhaustion. Her hair hung limply, lifeless. "You look different," I said, setting my tools down slowly. "So do you." Her gaze traveled over me. My squared shoulders, the healthier color in my face, the steadiness behind my eyes. "Why are you here, Juliana?" She stepped closer, her voice breaking. "I made a mistake. A huge one. But we were married for 18 years, Lucas. That's not nothing." Once, her tears would have unraveled me in seconds. I would have folded, tried to make it better. But now, I just stood there. She tried again. "Remember our wedding day? You said I was the most beautiful thing you'd ever seen. Remember when we moved into the house and we had to sleep on the floor because nothing had arrived yet? You told me you'd never been happier." I remembered. I did. But it all felt so far away, like scenes from someone else's movie. "I can change," she said quickly. "I've learned. We could start fresh. Maybe even have that baby we talked about." But I didn't answer. And that's when her expression shifted. Her voice dropped, cold and sharp. "You're sleeping with my sister. Doesn't that disgust you?" I grabbed a rag and wiped the grease from my hands, taking my time before I spoke. "What disgusts me is that you still think I'd believe a word you say." She recoiled, like the words physically hit her. "I'm not with Lena to hurt you," I added quietly. "I'm with her because she's never made me feel like I wasn't enough." Juliana's whole body seemed to deflate. She slumped onto a stool, her shoulders folding inward. "You don't know what I've been through," she whispered. And to my surprise, I found myself wondering, what had happened to her after she left? The town was small. People talked. I'd heard snatches of gossip in passing. Something about her leaving with a trucker who later stranded her when she turned down his advances. Then there was word of a rest stop, a diner in the next town, and a local rumor mill that devoured her. Apparently, the video from the drive-in had made its way online viral, at least in our part of the state. No one would hire her. She'd ended up slinging hash at a roadside diner where the customers didn't just want breakfast. They wanted her. When she finally reached a bank to pull some money, she realized every account was in my name. A detail she'd never cared about before. Boring paperwork, she used to call it. And as for Blake, her so-called dream man, he'd bailed the second his marriage blew up in the fallout. She lost everything. I'd heard the last nail in Juliana's illusion was delivered by none other than Sandra Monroe, our bank teller of nearly 2 decades. "You called him a failure," Sandra had told her bluntly. "Now look who ended up with nothing." There was no sense of victory in those stories. No smug satisfaction. Just a heavy, hollow ache for a woman who'd built her world on perception, and now had nothing left but pieces. "I sent you money," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "and arranged a way for you to get back to Chicago." Her head jerked up like I'd slapped her. "That was you?" I thought. "I assumed Lena." "Does it matter?" I asked. "You needed help. And 18 years ago, I promised to take care of you." I held her gaze for a moment. "This is the last time I'll keep that promise." Tears rolled down her face, but they stirred nothing in me. They reminded me of rainfall on glass, visible but distant. We weren't husband and wife anymore. We were strangers bound by a shared past that had already let go of us. Out the shop window, I spotted Lena standing across the street, pretending to browse the produce stand. She didn't interrupt. She didn't come inside. She just stood nearby, letting me finish what I needed to finish. She knew this was mine to walk through, alone. What I didn't know, what she hadn't told me yet, was that she'd booked a flight to Portland. "You need space," she'd say later that night, "to decide, really decide what you want and not what either of us want for you." As Juliana turned to leave, her hand paused on the doorknob. "I did love you," she said quietly, "in my own way." "I know," I replied, "but your way, it broke something in me, and I'm only just learning how to fix it." She nodded once. No more words, just a single final gesture. And then she walked out, the bell above the door sounding more like a sigh than a chime. I went back to the radio I'd been repairing, threading wires through the worn frame. The work was slow, careful, a kind of meditation. It reminded me of myself, something old and neglected, but still worth fixing. Through the window, I saw that Lena was gone. She'd given me what I didn't even know I needed: silence, space, the dignity to end my story with Juliana on my own terms. Tomorrow she'd be gone too, off to Portland, leaving me to stand on my own. Not as Juliana's husband, not even as Lena's second chance, just as Lucas Reed, a man trying to rebuild something from the pieces left behind. For days after Juliana left town for good, I found myself in front of the house we once shared. I hadn't stepped foot inside since that night at the drive-in. The key felt foreign in my hand, heavy. The lock turned with a click that echoed louder than expected. Everything inside was untouched, exactly how I'd left it, but it felt different, like the soul had been scooped out of it while I wasn't looking. I wandered through the rooms, the kitchen where I'd cooked in silence, the living room that had echoed with other people's laughter, the bedroom that had felt lonelier than most hotel rooms. By all accounts, the house was beautiful. Designer furniture, elegant decor, clean lines and neutral tones. But it never felt like mine. I'd simply lived in it, like a guest in someone else's museum. In the bedroom, I opened drawers and started sorting. Most of my clothes looked like they belonged to another man. Button-ups chosen to impress Juliana's friends. Pants that had always fit too tight. I kept only what mattered. Left behind anything picked out to please someone else. The garage was different. This was my place, my domain. I spent hours there, wiping every tool, cleaning each drawer, organizing parts by hand. It wasn't frantic or obsessive. It was quiet, purposeful, closure. In the bottom drawer of an old filing cabinet, I stumbled on a photo I'd forgotten existed. Me, age 25, standing proudly beside an engine I'd rebuilt the first summer I moved to Maple Glen. Grease-stained shirt, awkward stance, fierce eyes. But those eyes, what stopped me cold, were alive. I carried the photo into the bathroom and held it up next to my reflection. The man in the mirror was older. Lines etched deep around his eyes, hair peppered with gray. His shoulders were stronger now, hardened by recent work. But the eyes, they matched again. I'd found them. Somewhere in the last few months, I'd remembered who I used to be. When I got back to Lena's cottage that evening, a package sat waiting on the porch. My name scrawled across the brown paper in her handwriting. Inside was a small block of wood, hand-carved with a single word: Reed. Beneath it were 5 more words, barely carved but clear as day. The one I'd choose. I ran my thumb over the letters, my chest tightening. There was no letter, no explanation. Just that, along with a folded, hand-drawn map. It was marked with little stars and arrows, tracing a path from Maple Glen to a quiet neighborhood in Chicago. The message was unspoken but clear. That night, I got a call from Lena's neighbor. Her mother had fallen sick. She'd left for Chicago, suddenly, quietly, to help. She didn't call, didn't leave a note, didn't ask me to follow. She just left. A map on my porch, no expectations attached, no guilt, no pressure, just quiet trust. And that's when I finally understood what she was offering me. By walking away, she'd handed me the one thing no one else ever had. A real choice. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but out of my own damn will. Not running from something, running toward something if I wanted it. The next morning, I packed a small duffel and dropped it into the Mustang's trunk. I handed the shop keys to Tyler Briggs, my part-time assistant, along with a scribbled note. Hold down the fort. Don't burn anything. I didn't know how long I'd be gone, or if I'd come back at all. The Mustang's engine roared to life with a low, eager growl that vibrated through the wheel and right into my chest. It sounded ready. I felt ready too. On the passenger seat, I placed 3 things. The carved block of wood that read Reed, a dried wildflower I'd plucked from behind Lena's cottage, and an old photo of a little girl grinning beside a creek. I'd found it folded in the map. As Maple Glen shrank in my rearview mirror, sunlight spilled across the golden cornfields, warm and endless. But this didn't feel like an escape. felt like a beginning. Chicago hadn't changed. The skyline was still jagged and proud, traffic still a beast, the people still moving at a relentless pace. But something had changed in me. The edges didn't feel so sharp anymore. I followed Lena's map down streets I used to know by heart until I reached a narrow brownstone nestled between two oaks. The porch creaked as I stepped onto it. Before I could raise my hand to knock, the door opened. Lena stood there in jeans and a soft gray sweater, her hair loose, eyes calm. She didn't look surprised. Just peaceful. "You remembered the way," she said. "I remembered you," I replied. She stepped into me and wrapped her arms around my back, no questions asked. Behind her, soft jazz played from a familiar old radio, the one she'd brought into my shop months ago. I'd cleaned every inch of its circuitry, never knowing how much that small gesture would come to mean. The air inside her home was warm and easy. We ended up by the window, sitting cross-legged with mismatched mugs of tea, watching the city lights blink to life. Her shoulder pressed against mine, steady and sure. "How's your mom?" I asked. "Better," she said. Turned out she just needed a medication tweak. I nodded. We didn't fill the silence. We didn't need to. No performance. No pushing. No pretending. Just two people who'd finally stopped hiding from themselves and each other. I used to think I was just some average guy who'd made too many compromises. That maybe I'd settled for a version of life that was always going to feel just a little bit small. But I was wrong. Because sometimes it takes losing everything, the house, the titles, the woman you thought was your forever, to remember who you really are. And sometimes, if you're lucky, someone shows up who sees that version of you before you even find him again yourself. As Lena rested her head gently against my shoulder, I didn't feel like a man who was starting over. I felt like a man who'd finally come home. Because to her, I wasn't just enough. To her, I was everything.